We're live.
All right, here we are. What do we figure this is? Like episode 13?
No, it's episode 7. We did with the magistrates. We did the 3.1, 3.2.
Okay.
So
I was about to say that's impressive that I'm off by 50 per 100%.
That is how I bet horses, the 7 and the 13.
Well, here we are, switching things up a little bit. We've made it through our prelude to the Republican. Well, it's everybody's primary, but we only had Republican primaries on the ticket here in Gallatin County. Congratulations to all those who won and all those who ran a successful campaign or came up just short. We've got with us today Kentucky Farm Bureau Director of Public Affairs, Kyle Kelly, which is just a really fancy name for a lobbyist.
Good point.
We're going to have Kyle.
By the way, when a lot of people hear the term lobbyist, they automatically think of some supervillain that's out to destroy the world for personal gain. Yeah. And I can attest that is not Kyle Wayne.
At least not what we see here on the home front.
He's one of my very favorite people. And we're going to need you to explain a little bit what you do for Farm Bureau.
Yeah, so it is lobbying, which is what people think about lobbying in terms of my job is to talk to elected officials, mainly at the state level. It used to be registered to lobby at the national level. I'm not anymore. I still oversee our national lobbying, but Erica King actually does that for us now. So mainly I just lobby the members of the General Assembly, which are state reps and state senators. But I think the big difference in what people hear and see in lobbyists, they are people representing these large corporations. And that's where you always hear special interest in lobbyists that are paid by multi-billion-dollar corporations that pay somebody to go in and lobby their initiative. Whereas for me, I lobby for Kentucky Farm Bureau. So hopefully all three of you all are members of Kentucky Farm Bureau, and we'll get into a little bit of the structure probably of Kentucky Farm Bureau, but I actually lobby for a not-for-profit. So I lobby for Kentucky Farm Bureau Federation, which was a not-for-profit started back in 1919 by farmers that wanted a voice in Frankfort and in Washington for issues related to agriculture and rural communities. So we're made up of individuals, about 460,000 individuals across Kentucky, and depending what county you're in, you pay $26 to $35. Each county Farm Bureau is a little bit different, but it's 460,000 individuals, just like you all, that believe in the mission of Kentucky Farm Bureau, which is to help farmers and to help rural communities, and they each pay $26 to $35 to become a member, and that's the not-for-profit that I lobby for. So I listen to 460,000 individual citizens in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, not one large corporation.
That's something I didn't know before really Taylor got involved in Farm Bureau. There's really quite the procedure that Farm Bureau goes through for you to get your line of work for the year.
Yeah, and I should have brought a policy book. We've got about 100-page policy book because stuff goes in it every year. It rarely comes out, does it, Taylor? But it's happened since 1919, and it's our members vote on that policy. So, and we have about 27 advisory committees, and advisory committees are basically committees that specialize on one thing. So, like a beef advisory committee, pork advisory committee, small grains, tax advisory committee, education advisory committee, and so on and so forth. And they're made up of members from all areas of the Commonwealth. There are usually about 20 members on each, so there might be a couple from Northern Kentucky, a couple from Central, East, West, etc., and that specialize in that area. So like education committees made up of a lot of educators of all sorts, administrators. Tax advisory committees made up of farmers that might also be CPAs or, just people that kind of are involved in the tax policy. And they make recommendations that ultimately go to a committee called our Resolutions Committee. And our Resolutions Committee is made up of 2 members from each district. And there's 11 Farm Bureau districts. Taylor's one of them. And they're all elected by other farmers in that district. And they're made up of 2 members per district plus a young farmer chair, a Generation Bridge chair, which is farmers between 36 and 49, and a women's committee. So that committee looks through nearly 1,000, Taylor, policy recommendations.
It's a book about yay thick with no white space on any of the pages.
Yeah, so they'll go through roughly 1,000 recommendations from Farm Bureau members all over Kentucky. Can send in their idea. They want lower property taxes, or they want, they want a better road on 42. Whatever they might send in, they go through, and then that resolutions committee puts forth a document of what they believe we should lobby on. That will go to our full membership that attends our annual meeting, and then they will vote on that document.
So can any member put forth an
Yeah.
idea?
Through their county farm bureau.
Yes, and here in Gallatin County, that's something I wanted to highlight there. That's what's so neat about the Farm Bureau process, is if you're a Farm Bureau member, in our county it's $26. If you're a Farm Bureau member, before October 15th, if you submit anything, if it's bothering you that whatever, anything that's bothering you in our county, write it down on a piece of paper, take it to the Farm Bureau office, and we'll submit it. Now, that it will go before the entire 460,000 that Kyle mentioned, and if everybody else agrees, or at least more than 50% agree, that becomes his job description. So anybody has the opportunity to have their own lobbyist.
So it's genuinely, you are the voice in Frankfort for any of those 460,000 people.
Right. Yeah, and we are a grassroots organization, and I mean that's the strength of Kentucky Farm Bureau and why it's been successful for over 100 years is because I take what the citizens in that county that elect the state rep and state senator, I'm not going up there to tell them what is my opinion. I'm going up there to tell them what is your all's opinion, or at least those that are voting delegates of our organization who are all selected or elected. So to be a voting delegate, you're either selected by your county or sometimes elected by your county to serve in that role to ultimately vote on the policy that our organization will support or oppose.
Which I would think make your job a little bit easier because you can go to politicians and say, listen, I've got it on pretty good authority that your constituents want this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean,
It's quite a process. I've been to some of those conferences, and it's pretty interesting to watch the process happen.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. And like I mentioned, I work for the not-for-profit side, which is the side of Farm Bureau that was started in 1919. It wasn't until the 1940s that the insurance company came around, and that was because farmers couldn't get insurance. It's a risky business, whether it be your crops or your facilities. So ultimately, those farmers in the 40s decided they wanted to build an insurance company that would serve rural Kentucky, in particular farmers. And that's grown into the number one insurance company by market share in the state of Kentucky. And we're the only state where State Farm isn't the number one market share leader. And that's something that was never a goal of Farm Bureau, but from the insurance side is something to definitely be proud of because it shows we've served our members well to do that. But the insurance company is a for-profit company that came in the 1940s to serve farmers in rural communities. To make sure that those individuals also had insurance. And there's an office in every single county. When you get, I'm not trying to get too, sales pitchy here, but I mean, it is one company that you have somebody in every single county that you can go knock on that door. You're not just submitting a claim through an online portal and hoping somebody from a call center somewhere in the world is going to call you and, try to help you through your claim. You can go up there and knock on Dan Peterson's door, and you're going to get him or somebody in that office to talk to you. So it's a good business model, and it's been successful for many years.
In terms of your job and what you do representing the 460,000 Kentucky Farm Bureau members, I'm not sure, I didn't totally understand this until 10 years ago-ish maybe, but we always hear about legislators in D.C. They're there all the time. In Kentucky, we have a specific session. If you don't mind, kind of tell our listeners a little bit about that time frame, and then tell a little bit about this most recent session and what Farm Bureau is able to accomplish.
Yeah, so the state is different than national. So national, you serve, their Congress is in for 2 full years. Now, they don't go in every single day. They do have August recess. They've got October recess. They'll have recesses for when they're in session. And the House and the Senate sets that, but each Congress lasts 2 years. So if I file a bill on January 1 of 2027, it will last through December 31 of 2028. Whereas in Kentucky, we only have so many days, and that's in the Constitution. And from For many years, it was just on even years, and you had 60-day sessions, and it's in the Constitution that you have to gavel in the first Tuesday after the first Monday of the new year. And then you're in from that day until April 15th. April 15th, constitutionally, is the last day. So it's more than 60 days, right? I mean, it's 3.5 months, but they're not in every single day. They're only the days they're in count towards that 60. So for many years, that was it. You came in even years for 60 days, and that was the budget session. That's where we did our budget, and that constitutionally has to be done, and it's a 2-year budget. It wasn't until around the year 2000 when there was a constitutional amendment to come in the odd years for a 30-day legislative session. So it also gavels in the first Tuesday after the first Monday of the new year. They're in for 4 days, and that's their structural days. That's where they elect their leadership. That's where they appoint all the committee chairs. And then they gavel out for about a month. They come back in the first Tuesday of February, and then constitutionally they have to be out by March 30th on odd years. So when March 30th comes on an odd year or April 15th on an even year, if nothing has passed, they still have to be out. And then the governor has to call them into a special session if they had to come in and do anything, a budget or anything else the governor might want them to do potentially. But in terms of when they are guaranteed to be in and guaranteed to be out, that's the first Tuesday after the first Monday, and it's April 15th or March 30th.
And what about this year? What's some big ticket items from this year?
Yeah, so Farm Bureau or just in general?
Both.
Okay, so this year it was a budget session. So the budget is the biggest thing that had to happen. And when you look at the state budget, and this is something that I think everyone should be interested in, it's about a $14 billion budget when you look at state dollars. Now, there's a lot of federal dollars. There's a lot of restricted fund dollars. When you look at general fund dollars, it's roughly $14 billion.
What were we dealing with here? About 3.5 or 4.5 million?
In the general fund, I think.
No, it's the same.
Yeah, it was around 13 million or something, I think.
You're talking about the general fund for the
The
state.
general fund for
Oh,
the
the
state.
general fund.
So the general fund for the state, and it's made up of all kinds of taxes. So you do have the state property tax. Then you also have sales tax, and there's a bunch of different taxes that the state can collect. But like what Gallatin County collects, constitutionally, no locality can implement a sales tax. So they have to implement a property tax. That's how they're funded: property tax, occupational tax. They can implement an insurance premium tax, and some of them locally, depending on your size and the class of city and things, you can potentially implement like a restaurant tax, alcohol, things like that can help fund local governments. But predominantly, the state is funded by property tax, sales tax, and income tax. So that's your three-legged stool that funds state government, and that's roughly $14 billion now in general fund dollars. But the point that I wanted to mention for the listeners, 90% of that, roughly, is spent on three things. By the time you educate, medicate, and incarcerate, 90% of your budget's gone. So when you as a citizen or me as a lobbyist get upset if we don't get something funded out of Frankfort, like, you have to realize about 90% of that money is spent on things it has to be spent on. And that's education, Medicaid programs, healthcare, and incarceration, jails, prisons, things
really
like
not that much different in the county level. I mean, we talked about the budget a lot. You got the jail fund, you've got the school eats up most of the property tax here. So it's really not that much different here than it is at the state level.
And now the other big funding source is the road fund. So like gas tax does go into the road fund, plus some other fees and sales taxes from vehicles, things like that go into the road fund that does help fund what road projects are done. And that's roughly, I think, $1 billion, $1.5 billion roughly that goes into the road fund for maintenance, new roads, things like that, which is separate from the general fund. That's its own budget.
So that's
The road
something.
fund budget is separate from general government budget.
That's something I wanted to clarify with you. That's 22.2% fuel tax, correct?
No. So like you're thinking of Kentucky Farm Bureau policy, which is 22.2% of the dollars in the road fund go to rural secondary roads.
Okay.
Yeah. So the gas tax in Kentucky is extremely complicated. So it's based on a wholesale price of gas, and then it's a percentage of that wholesale price of gas, and it can fluctuate up and down, but there's a price floor, so it can't go below this floor.
Yeah, they had to put the floor in a few years ago when the price of fuel really went down.
2014, I believe, was when they put the floor in, and a lot of people across Kentucky said that's a tax increase because we limited it from dropping.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I think if there's one thing we can all agree on, we need roads and bridges.
Yeah.
So they put that floor in there, and then there's like a 10% ceiling. I believe it's 10% that it can go up. So that tax can only go up so much. But it's roughly, and the governor did just do an executive order lowering it, I think about 10 cents. But
So
I believe it's about 26.5 cents
when you
per
buy
gallon,
fuel,
I believe,
though,
roughly the state portion. But then
that's
there's
what I
a
was going
federal
to say.
gas
There's federal
tax
and
too.
state
Yeah.
road tax.
I've been told from a retailer that sells gas, it's about 60 cents per gallon, roughly, that they collect in tax and
When you
remit.
get gas in Ohio, there's a sticker on every pump that shows where all your money's going, which I find pretty handy. You get that down in Kentucky.
Yeah, well, that's something. Hey, every gas pump you go to, you'll see Jonathan Shell's name on it because of all people, the Kentucky Department of Agriculture is the entity in charge with inspecting fuel pumps, which is interesting. But they don't set the prices or the tax.
Yeah.
Jonathan Shell's the man. He's not he's not guilty of that. What his team does is make sure when you pump a gallon of gas, you're getting
Get the
a
gallon.
full 1 gallon,
Yeah.
and they ensure the quality of it too. So they not just quantity but quality.
So you mentioned the policy book there on the county and rural roads, 22.2%.
22.2%.
So that's something you all would handle. Somebody has asked you all to look at. What's that issue?
So that is when you look at the gas tax, and they call it the formula of fifths. And you really need my wife Gracie in here, who's lobbied for CAECO, which is the counties, and now she lobbies for the League of Cities. She certainly understands the full formula of fifths, but essentially it's you got one pot here for rural and secondary roads. That's like our rural secondary state road, like a 42, a 127, a 35. And then you've got counties, a county's account. And then you've got a city, and that's about 13%. Then you've got a city's account that's around 7%. And then you've got some other account, and then basically like the like governor's account that he can use for specialty. And I don't remember what that fourth one is, but they call it the formula of fifths. And that 22.2% that's Farm Bureau priority policy is ensuring that you collect 100%. We want to make sure at least 22.2% of that pie goes towards our rural secondary state roads. Like I mentioned, 42, 35, 127, roads like that.
So that would be one of the 460,000 have said the counties need more money for those roads. Let's make sure that we get that money.
Well,
Those are
those are
state
state.
roads.
Those are state roads.
Okay.
Those are state roads. So those would be state roads that run through rural counties.
Okay.
Now, where does the money that funds our local road department that services in our county, like a Knox Lillard or a whatever, without a yellow line, where does that money come from?
So that would be part of that 13% that goes into that pie, and then that is determined based on the transportation cabinet or counties. They get to submit their projects, and then there's different districts around the state, transportation districts, and a portion of that money then goes kind of based on need.
So you would call that accomplished policy then, that 22.2%?
Correct. So like when the road fund budget, transportation budget passed again this year, they got at least 22.2% of all the money they collected is going towards rural secondary. And really this year it'll be more than that because they did a one-time spending bill and they put money into road projects. So they actually funded more than they normally would because we do have a budget surplus right now.
Let's bring this conversation home a little bit to some of our hotter topics in Gallatin County. In all this, where's the money coming from that's widening I-71 as it cuts through? Because I didn't hear that allocation there.
I would say that that's a federal project. So the federal, there, as Henry mentioned here, there's also a federal excise tax that goes into funding federal roads like interstates. And many of them will require some type of state match. So I'm sure the state put in. And the other thing about the transportation, there's a 2-year road plan and a 6 or 7-year road plan. So we only fund, we will pass bills or resolutions that have projects in the 2-year and then in the 6 and 7-year, but there's only enough money allocated to do those 2-year projects. So the federal government I'm not as familiar with, but they also do have that federal excise tax for transportation projects. And it's hard to tell. I mean, they might have gotten the I-71 project in when they were still racing, when NASCAR was still here. And it might have been in the 10-year federal plan, and it might just now have gotten started.
So I want to ask you about that. I mean, with your experience, you've been in Frankfort for how long now, roughly?
Over a decade.
So you've been there for over a decade. That's the answer we've gotten, because we've asked that question to local legislators or candidates. Why is that happening? Because there's a lot of buzz in our county. Are we getting a data center? Are we getting what's happening with Speedway, et cetera, et cetera? The interstate's widening. What's that mean? And they said it's been in the plan for 10 years. Would you attest to that most likely?
I don't know exactly, but probably. And that's the way it's supposed to work. Like the 2-year plan is supposed to be, this is our dollars. These projects are happening in the next 2 year. Our 6-year plan, these are going to rotate in. What's supposed to be funded in year 3 and 4 during our next budget cycle of 28, years 3 and 4 should now move to years 1 and 2. It doesn't always work that way, but that's the way it's supposed to. So from a federal standpoint, it might work closer to how that model's supposed to be, and they might have got it in 10 years ago, and it's just now cycling through to happen. But there's not been any talk in Frankfort in terms of we have to widen 71 in Sparta because a data center or any other projects coming to the county. If that's been said, it's been the best kept secret in Frankfort. And let me tell you, secrets aren't real well kept in Frankfort.
But that's that little analogy you just gave there. I mean, that was very validating. I think it was Donnie Sullivan that said the government wheels turn slow.
Yeah.
And you're talking about stuff that we're trying to do right now, but it's known well and good. It isn't going to happen for 6 years.
Yeah, and I'll tell you a big project in Owen County, which is where I live. I mean, we had widening Highway 22 from like Owen County High School to Dry Ridge was in the road plan for like 14 or 15 years. It finally got done. Damon Thayer, who's a retired state senator, he was the majority floor leader. He represented Owen County for a long time, and he retired. And kind of his going away, he's like, I am making sure that project happens. He didn't even have Owen County in his final term, but him and our former state rep, Phil Pratt, was retiring too, and Sal Santoro out of Boone County, who got beat a few years ago, was chairman of the Budget Reserve Committee on Transportation, and all of them kind of helped make that 22 widening, which 22 is still a terrible road, but it's better now. But that was something that is talked about basically my whole life, and it took over 14, 15 years before it ever actually came to fruition.
Well, something locally that would have been similar is probably 42. That could have been one of those 6 or 7 year deals that could have been in the process. The road was terrible for a long time, and then finally one day it's ready to work.
Based on what you just said, I think this is something very interesting for our listeners to hear, to gain a grasp of potentially. You mentioned how that was a need and a budgeted need for 14 years, but it was finally one guy or one group of guys that got it done and pushed it across the finish line. So talk about the importance at a rural county level to have a connection in Frankfort, whether it be your state rep or your judge that goes and visits there frequently. Talk about that a little.
There's nothing more important than having a relationship with legislators in Frankfort. If you're a citizen, building that relationship. And it's important to elect people who also have those relationships. The most important thing, whether people like it or not, is who's in leadership. There's 5 people elected to leadership in Kentucky in the House. Well, there's 5 majority party and 3 minority parties. So we happen to have supermajority Republicans in both chambers. So there's the Speaker of the House, Speaker Pro Tem, Majority Floor Leader, Whip, and Caucus Chair. And it's the same. The Senate, they call them President Pro Tem rather than Speaker and Speaker Pro Tem. And then the minority party, they'll have like a minority leader, a whip, and a caucus chair. So that's their 3. Those 5 people in the House and the Senate determine all of the chairmen or chairwomen, chairpersons, whatever we want to say, chairs. They determine the chairs of all the committees. And there's several committees. I don't know the exact number, but you have like the Agriculture Committee, the Appropriations and Revenue Committee, which is the one everyone wants to be on. That controls the money. Transportation Committee. They control our transportation laws, but not necessarily our road budget. That will actually go through Appropriations and Revenue through the Budget Reserve Committee on Transportation, Natural Resources Committee, all these Education Committee, and there's 2 education committees now, kind of a K-12 and then a post-secondary now, Health and Services. Anyway, all those committees, those chairs are selected by the 5 members of leadership. No bill can pass. Nothing can become law. I mean, you can amend bills. There are some language that can be added, but a bill can only pass if it's passed through a committee first. The committee chairs determine what goes through their committees. So leadership and who we elect and how they get along with their other members of the elected members of the House and the Senate matter.
Does Gallatin County have any representation in a leadership role?
They do not. No, they do not. Now,
The last time I can think of us having a significant role would be when Rick Rand chaired the A&R committee,
yes.
but that's still not leadership. When's
No,
the
but-
last time we had actual leadership?
I'm not sure.
Maybe
I'm
not
not
in our
sure.
lifetime. Probably not.
Not in the decade I've been there, but Appropriation and Revenue Committee is a very powerful committee, and Rick Rand was the chair of that when he was a state rep in this county. And I will just tell a funny story. Jay Williams, our senator, when Jimmy Higdon, who retired this year, he was chair of the Senate Transportation and helped work on the transportation budget. When he was giving his floor speech, he specifically mentioned, and they don't say their names on the floor. That's against the rules. They set rules. They call them the gentleman from, or the Senate, Senate District 20. And he's like, we have a lot of people come in here and talk to us. He's like, I couldn't get the gentleman from Boone or out of my office. He was in here lobbying me so hard for road fund projects. So just because they're not in leadership or not a chairman doesn't mean they can't have influence. It just means they have to have relationships with those people. And like for Senator Williams in that case, he and now retired Senator Higdon did have what seemed to me anyway, and joked about on the floor, a good relationship, and he did help get some projects funded in the transportation budget.
What? I'm sure you're relatively familiar. There's a lot of talk in our county right now. We've got a speedway that's no longer a speedway. And I'm going to just redirect, since we've been talking about stuff that's going on in Frankfort and state government that applies to us here locally. But is there any talk in Frankfort? We've had our current judge, we've had our judge candidates, we've had several magistrate candidates on, and everybody talks about a data center. There might be a data center coming. We got to have this come. Our tax money's running out. Is there any talk of anything actually happening in Frankfort that you've been aware of?
So data centers are a very hot topic nationwide, not just Kentucky, nationally. That's something President Trump has talked about, basically calling it the next race to the moon. It is a national security issues. When you look at Washington and Frankfort, what they're discussing is that data centers, we have to have them here, not in China, because whoever has them controls the information that is stored. And it's a lot of information that's stored. And data centers have been around for a long time. There's the number one state in the nation that has data centers is Virginia. Virginia has more data centers. It's really become a hotter topic recently because of the size of these data centers, these hyperscale data centers and artificial intelligence. So there is a lot of discussion in Frankfort happening. In terms of Gallatin County, the Kentucky Speedway, you might hear it in the hall as a potential location, but I also hear that Carroll County is a potential location. I hear all over the state. We have members call us worried or telling, and rightfully so, they're worried. We're losing over 100,000 acres of farmland every single year in Kentucky alone. That's our number one issue for Kentucky Farm Bureau, is figuring out how we stop losing farmland. So we are very worried about data centers and how much farmland they might take up. But in terms of Sparta and any legislation or dollars allocated to have a project directly in Gallatin County, that's nothing that I'm aware of. But yes, I have heard that there potentially could be one there, and I think they're looking at a lot of sites.
It's funny that you referenced it as, Donald Trump calls it the current race to the moon or whatever.
Yeah.
That's something that we've heard off air here, is that these things could be outdated in 10 years and that we may be doing them in space instead of here.
There's a lot of people that believe they're going to be launching them up like satellites, or taking advantage of the solar and the solar energy that's pretty much unlimited in space, and that it's cold in space. So there's
You
not
don't
a
have to cool it
cooling
with
issue.
billions of gallons of water.
And I do know too that something interesting. The University of Louisville is actually doing studies right now about, can data centers and these servers operate in mines or cave systems. So the University of Louisville, and I think it's two different of their colleges. I don't remember the two, but they're doing some pretty cool research to try to figure out where can these things exist, and because caves and mines are colder. They're naturally one
I
temperature.
don't know that you'd ever get it to pass for a cave on environmental, but I could certainly see like a reclaimed old coal mine that's a good secondary use for it. I've always thought that'd be great for nuclear.
And in terms of data centers and the ones that are the moving forward in Kentucky that I know for a fact, well, I guess I don't know for a fact, but I've talked and it's been talked about in Frankfort, that there's a big data center that's being built in Hallsville, Kentucky, I believe it is, at the old Century aluminum plant. It's an old smelter plant. It was over 50 years old. It wasn't being operated anymore, or they were looking to phase it out, and that will become a data center. I don't think that's a secret. It's been talked about a lot in Frankfort, and that's probably a pretty good place to put one. It's a giant idled industrial facility that already has utilities. It's already got certain environmental permits.
In terms of the tax revenue that they generate, have you seen any examples where they actually generate these crazy sums of money for the communities that people have been floating?
I have not, and there are some what's technically data centers in Kentucky in terms of these hyperscale data centers that are going to be forward of $15 billion investments. I don't know that we have any of those to actually see what is the true property tax return on investment. I do know when the one was being discussed in Oldham County, several of their magistrates went to Virginia to tour some and talk to their local governments, and it's really going to depend on how they're structured. I mean, if they get industrial revenue bonds or in lieu of tax payments, it could depend. It could vary. If they just came in and built the shell of a building, because when you think of these things, the technology is all on the inside and what would be really tangible property, not necessarily physical, real property structure. So I think it'll just depend on how they're going to be assessed in terms of what on the inside of the building is subject to
So the
taxes.
majority of the taxable value would probably be tangible tax, not property tax, you think?
I guess it'd either be tangible or a different type of real property, if like those servers would be considered real property or tangible.
Right,
But
if they're a fixture.
And whose responsibility is it to make sure that if one were to locate here, that our county would receive those funds? Is that on the PVA? Is that on the judge in striking that deal?
So it would be, one, what does the state law and the Constitution allow? And the Constitution, I'm pretty confident, doesn't speak to data centers. So it would kind of be, what does the state law allow in terms of how they're defined? I don't exactly know how they would be defined, but it would be the local leaders would be potentially in charge of making some of these deals in terms of an IRB. And an interesting industry that's kind of been changing recently to look at, a lot of local governments wanted distilleries in their counties, and one of our best friends owns a distillery, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like Neely family. But some of the global mega giant distilleries, a lot of counties wanted those, and they would do industrial revenue bonds basically saying you owe $1 in real property tax because there's a barrel tax.
Yeah, the barrel tax was the...
But the state general assembly a couple of years ago is now phasing out, starting this year, for the next 20 years, 2026 to 2046, they're now phasing out the barrel tax, which is what a lot of counties signed 100-year deals.
Are they going to be paying property tax now for the distilleries that aren't going to be paying the barrel tax?
It's my understanding that those industrial revenue bonds on what they guaranteed their real property tax rate to be wouldn't change.
You're going to have to explain the revenue bonds.
Yeah, the industrial revenue bonds are, I mean, to me, a pretty complex issue in their own right. I'm not sure that I have ever talked to anyone who could really explain them in a way that I could understand exactly how they work. I mean, I guess there's a lot of different kinds of them, different stipulations.
There are, and I'm not the expert in industrial revenue bonds. And I mean, there's other things that the state government allows, like there's tax increment financing, TIF districts. That's how Yum got built in Louisville, they had a TIF district. I'm not the expert in those, but essentially like these IRBs, they're just agreements that county governments can make with industry. And I kind of look at them as like an in lieu of taxes. So like if you come here and we're going to agree that this property is going to be X dollars for the next 100 years, and that's what we're going to do, rather than what we might see on our individual homes and farms where, our assessments might go up every year because the valuation of our property's going up. So I'm not the expert to speak to IRBs.
Do you think that they're pretty flexible, or are there real specific guidelines that have to be followed for these IRBs? Or
that's my understanding, is that they are written very specific guidelines, and
I just wonder about the flexibility that the local government has when they're trying to strike one of these deals. Like I think Ryan had mentioned something about now the school has to be made whole or something, which when we were earlier looking at the school board budget, the amount of money in lieu of taxes that is paid by Nucor does not add up as made whole.
No.
For the school here. So I'm not sure how that shakes out, but
that I'm not sure of either. And I think when you ask how like strict they have to be, what I was saying, they're very strict. I think what by that I meant it's a contract they sign. I think maybe the county or whoever does an IRB has some flexibility in the original contract, but I think once both parties sign,
once
yes,
it's done.
It's just like if you and I signed a contract, and I guess if one of us broke it, we could sue each other. And I think that's how business could sue counties. I mean, that's happening in some places, and I guess the county could sue business. And
I would hope for the counties that have enticed these distilleries to come in for the barrel tax, and the state has removed the barrel tax. I hope they have something to be able to get out of their bond.
Would those IRBs be public record? Can anybody go pull in, like the industrial revenue bond that we have with Nucor, for example? Can anybody go look at that?
I'm not sure. They should be,
If
but
the
I'm not
government's
sure.
the one that signed it, I would have to
You'd
think so.
Yeah, typically.
But I do know there's some counties that are fighting some distilleries on renegotiating those IRBs because they kind of say, well, we made this deal predicated on this state law.
I think,
But I will give members of the General Assembly credit too on in everything there's compromise. I mean, the distilleries wanted we need to do away with this tomorrow. And the General Assembly did a delayed effective date to 2026 and then phased it out for 20 years so counties wouldn't take a massive hit. Because when you look at like Bullitt County or Marion County, Nelson County, I mean, it was in the tens and tens of millions that they were receiving in barrel tax that funded their governments, their schools. I mean, it was a property tax. It was a property tax on barrels.
Mm-hmm.
big deal.
Yeah.
It's a situation that we got coming here. Sounds like in Gallatin County is the revenue situation, which I guess ties us back to the Speedway property. That's ever that conversation is never going away on any of these podcasts. So
I guess with the topic of the Speedway, there's been some new ideas floating around, or rumors, I guess. It was talked about at the thing down on 42 that maybe some sort of, livestock operation of some nature may potentially be.
I mean, none of the three of us were there. I assume you, I-71 corridor project. I don't know.
Alliance. Yep.
A pretty big deal. We had the governor in our town.
Supposed to. I don't think he was there.
Oh, he wasn't there. Okay, I did notice in the photos Rocky Atkins was there, but
Rocky, as senior advisor, was there.
Okay.
I wasn't really familiar with that group until I saw that on social media and how much attention it's gotten. But in terms of, Josh, I will say there's been a lot of talk about having a kill plant or a feedlot, something of that nature in Kentucky. I have heard the Speedway property mentioned. I don't know how serious it's been, but it has been mentioned as a potential location. But I don't know if that's just somebody's got an idea.
When you say a kill lot, that sounds
harvesting facility.
Yeah,
so
that sounds kind of bad. What exactly would that look like?
A lot of people are familiar with a slaughterhouse. Like they may take their one steer to be slaughtered. You go down to Trackside in Campbellsburg, and you bring home and you fill your freezer with beef. This is that times 1,000. And you know, just the consumption of resources, the employment, which is debatable as to whether it's good or bad. Like it is a massive thing that would prospectively be happening.
Yeah, and there was one about 5 or 6. It was around COVID, maybe a little before COVID. There was a pretty large facility being discussed going in Christian County in West Kentucky. Ultimately, that facility went into Missouri instead. But what makes Kentucky so attractive to a potential slaughterhouse facility, whatever we want to call it?
Harvest plant
Is we're the number one beef cattle state east of the Mississippi. And we also have a massive company, used to be Griffin Industries, Darling Ingredients. You have rendering facilities that are not far from here. All right, I think they're in Pendleton County, northern Kentucky area.
Griffin is who, I guess, got the old wheel factory.
Yeah.
So when you look at how many cattle are in Kentucky, number one state east of the Mississippi River, and when you look at a big problem for slaughterhouses or slaughter facilities is, it's profitable to sell steaks, but you have a lot left over, as you all know. You all do direct delivery. You take a 1,400-pound steer, you don't come back with 1,400 pounds of meat. It's probably, 700, 800 pounds?
No, and less than that.
Less than that. So about half of that means
500.
that it's waste. So these facilities, like a trackside, they have to find somewhere for their waste to go.
So they make some of this stuff would go to like what, dog food, things like that, or glue. I guess for horses or something they used to
Fertilizer products.
Fertilizer, yeah.
Yeah, I guess they can dog treats and things
now,
like that.
Let's just so all our listeners, this is just something we heard through the grapevine. This is not a proposal. This is not about to happen. But
I'm just talking about rumors.
You can confirm that what we've heard is not a totally unwarranted rumor. Like there is a little substance behind that.
Yeah, I think there's a
potential.
I don't know how if there's been any agreements or non-disclosures or anything, but I do know that for many years there's been an interest in getting a facility in Kentucky and this location. We're in the heart of the Golden Triangle. We have airport facility 40 minutes away with CVG. The Amazon and DHL have a major hub. UPS has a major hub in Louisville. I think you can be just about anywhere in the United States.
Hey, don't slight us. We'll get to this in a minute, but we got our own airport 2 minutes from where we're going to put this kill plant.
I've listened to your all's updates. That's a nice perk for the county. But it is Kentucky is an attractive place, and we've had meetings with people just talking about how much value could that add for the farmer, because that's what we're about. Like our mission at Farm Bureau has always been to increase net profitability for our members, and the closer you get those animals to the end consumer's mouth, the more valuable it is, no matter what that product is. So what could that mean for Kentucky if we got a large facility that was going to process animals to where we're not selling them at 500, 600 pounds to go to the next farmer to sell them at 900 pounds to go out west to be finished at 12 or 1,400? What could it mean if we could all finish our cattle here and sell a 1,400 pound animal instead of a 600 pound animal? What would that mean for our farmers? So there's been discussions for a long time. How legitimate is one to come here? It was very, very serious for Christian County, but it didn't. I don't really know why, but it didn't. So there's never been anywhere close to that I'm aware of in our region.
Well, just so we can educate our listeners a little bit. Hearsay. I don't live in Christian County. I don't know anything about it, but what I heard through the grapevine would be these plants would bring in massive numbers of employees that most likely do not come from our local residents.
A lot of immigrants.
Doesn't have to. It doesn't have to be that way. There's no mandate that they have to not be American citizens. The reality just is that I've been through some in other states. It's not a glamorous.
99 out of 100 of these. That's where their workforce comes from.
So you look at a massive influx of foreign native residents that would be moving into the county.
That was the big pushback down there locally.
Massive water usage.
Mm-hmm.
But
I would have to imagine there's a really bad smell that comes along with it also. A strong smell.
So everything we're talking about or at least what I'm talking about, is beef related. Because when we look at poultry, we have a lot of poultry slaughterhouses in Kentucky. We have a huge pork slaughter facility right in the heart of Louisville.
Yeah.
JBS has a huge plant right dead smack in Louisville.
Really? That's
And
interesting.
they control their smell. So it would depend on what that facility really looks like.
Yeah.
But I think from a just harvesting facility standpoint, most of the smell would probably be left behind at the farmer's gate, and they're just bringing a semi-loaded
Yeah.
cattle in. So it would depend on what kind of facility it is.
Now, if
but
it
we've
was-
also talked about a feedlot
Now that
where we
would
wouldn't be
smell.
harvesting. We would just be
Yeah, that'd be,
it'd be like essentially a giant stockyards that doesn't actually sell cattle to individuals. They would just be finishing cattle on a contract to send to one of the big four meat packers, which is a whole conversation in its own right. Is there's 4 companies that own 80% of the beef packing in America.
yeah, some of those aren't American-owned companies.
I think
Yeah.
didn't our now ex-congressman have a legislation against that?
I don't know if he
Massey.
had legislation against it, but he definitely did support.
He had the
Prime
Prime
Act.
Act.
He had
What was
the Prime Act was to allow people to harvest animals without a USDA inspection. So to sell direct to the consumer, you have to have a USDA inspector on site at that facility. So trackside might only harvest animals with a USDA inspection on Mondays. Now, Tuesday through Friday, they might harvest animals for your own consumption or based on the hoof. So if you can sell halves, wholes, and quarters to people and not have to have a USDA inspector. But if you are selling a package, just one ribeye steak, it has to be USDA certified. Unless, and here's the thing, they allow the Meat Interstate Compact. So there are over a dozen states, it might be closer to 20 at this point, that have an agreement with USDA to allow sales in between those states with a state meat inspection program. Kentucky doesn't participate because we don't have a state inspector. And that was the Prime Act, and Congressman Massey did get language into the Farm Bill that passed just earlier this month that would, he called it the Subprime Act because it wasn't full open, but it would allow you to process an animal without a USDA inspector. It allowed like local inspector or some local health department and things like that. So there was some oversight, and still sell that ribeye direct to a end consumer at a farmer's market, but it couldn't cross state lines and things like that. But there is currently, if that didn't become law, it just passed the House. It's unclear if the Senate's going to do it or not. But current law does allow for a Meat Interstate Compact to where we could start a state inspection program. We could join the Meat Interstate Compact, and we could sell to all other states that are part of that compact. And I don't know those states off the top of my head, but I do know it's more than a dozen. Like I say, probably closer to 20 that are a part of that now.
Yeah.
So on the feedlot, what's that look like? That's different than the harvest plant.
Yeah, a feedlot. We could start a feedlot right now.
Yeah.
I mean, the 4 of us, if we wanted to. There's nothing that stops a feedlot from happening. It just doesn't make sense from a business standpoint. The big thing in Kentucky why we don't have one is because we do have adequate rainfall, which is important. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
But when you look at where our feedlots are, in Texas, Colorado, Kansas, Nebraska, it's either where it's dry or it's where the feed source is. It's where the most corn, beans, wheat, things like that, oats, other things.
And I know that's been a conversation before. I mean, we were first buying cattle 15 years ago, and I can remember talking to people about we've got to get something in the state because everybody sends their cattle out west.
We do. we largest beef cattle state east of the Mississippi, and we raise them up and send them out west to ultimately be processed and shipped straight back in here to a retailer for us to buy. But a feedlot, what could it look like? A lot of different things. I mean, it could look like us 4 getting a bunch of money and just going around the state buying cattle and feeding them and hoping we get a contract with one of the big 4, or it could potentially be set up like a co-op, which I think is a very attractive model, to where it's, like any co-op would work, where somebody manages it, but farmers, if you send a 10 head, you've got that percentage in. If you send 100 heads, you've got a larger percentage in the co-op, and at the end of the year, you're all members of that co-op.
I have to imagine the four of us would have a hard time acquiring the land out there.
Yeah, that price tag.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, we could talk all day about how it would be good for agriculture. I mean, agriculturally speaking, that's a no-brainer. But
more importantly for us here is what would the impact be on our local community?
Exactly,
around it.
That's what I was going to say. I mean, when we talk about Speedway property, we talk about a data center that might generate $60 million a year, or we need another new core comp that's going to generate at least $1 million a year. What would a facility like this do for local tax revenue? Prospectively, ain't nothing we're going to hold you to.
So if it was a harvesting facility and it had 1,200 employees, if Gallatin County has an occupational
tax would be substantial if there wasn't.
It would be. Now, if it was a feedlot that had 5 employees feeding cattle, I don't know what that would.
If those 1,500 people made $40,000, I mean that's $60 million to throw occupational tax at. So I mean that.
Huh? Oh, $60 million total dollars.
Yeah, I can't remember the
There's
rate.
There's a payroll for that.
Does anybody remember the rate off?
It'd probably be less than 3%. I think
I want to say it's 1 to 2%.
I was 1 or maybe even be a 0.5, 0.5%.
I think it's 1%.
I think it's 1.
But then you have to think of the value add for the farmers too. I mean, that's the thing that agriculture. So this is something that
$60 million at 1%.
600,000.
And you're just talking about that facility though. When you look at agriculture economic development, when you look at yes, they might employ, what did we say, 1,500, 12 or 1,500 people?
Yeah, 1,500.
But how many farmers are they going to service? Like, how many farmers are going to take their animals there and add value to their farming operation? And farmers pay taxes too.
Yeah.
So how many farm businesses would also be increasing their profit that would also be subject to certain taxes? So
I think
it would be more than just that facility in terms of its economic benefit to the community.
Well, and I could see a lot of spin-off business. Like we frequently talk about how Carroll County has reaped so many advantages in terms of spin-off business in relation to all the industry down 42. That would require, I mean, there are going to be tons and tons of trucking coming in and out of there. So you would think you would get some service industry. You would think, I assume there has to be a ton of refrigeration. You think you might get some HVAC industry. Just anything operating on that scale, there would theoretically be a lot of industry that would be attracted to locate in the surrounding area.
I don't know why that just made me think of this, but we were talking about the industrial revenue bonds earlier, and on a previous episode we had discussed or had raised the question of why the portion of the Speedway property on the opposite side of 35 from the actual Speedway itself, like all that parking and stuff. I think it's like 170. It's like 170 acres over there that if you look it up on the PVA website, it comes up as Gallatin County owns it. And apparently there was a separate bond, a bond deal done there concerning that, I guess, that funded the tunnel under the road there. So I don't know if the county's supposed to be collecting some sort of bond payment on that or not, but there was something different about that because of that tunnel than the rest of the Speedway property.
I've honestly heard it explained as being comparable to the manner in which the county came into owning the American Racing facility. There's some weird something there where
The question that I had, though, was, what I was told was that the county has not been collecting a bond payment on that.
Might be because they own it now, like the wheel factory.
So do they? If that'd be an interesting development if we found out the county owned 170 acres there.
And I've been told that already has all the infrastructure it needs over there. That it's got water, electric over there. So on that side of the road. Yeah, so that could potentially be a very attractive location because utilities are extremely expensive to run.
Yeah, infrastructure is a big deal for any business.
And the county and city typically run those. They pay to have those ran to industrial parks, and I think the Speedway already has all that. And that's why it is such an attractive site to a lot of people in Kentucky. But
I think one of the things that also makes it attractive for any sort of manufacturing or even a data center, because at the current moment they need to be close to people. I want to say that in a 500-mile radius or a one-day drive, it's like 35% of the U.S. population from here.
That's
Pretty
a crazy
big-
statistic.
it's a pretty big
That
deal.
is, yeah.
Yeah.
We're not. I mean, we're really not very far from Chicago.
Indianapolis, Columbus, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Louisville, Nashville,
Yeah, I mean, you can get to a lot of population in a
day's drive.
day's drive.
Yep.
Yep. Tell you another thing that the property has in the way of infrastructure. They got an airport.
The county, not the property, not the speedway. The county.
Well, it is what it is, but so I feel like we've talked ourselves blue about this daggone airport,
Yeah.
and we keep
I do have some new thoughts on that we haven't that I haven't really.
throw them out there.
Fair.
I want this guy to give us some fact checking on what's coming from the state. What does he know about it?
Yeah, well, the first thing that I thought of recently was that, the notion that we've been told that they gave us an airport. They said, well, if somebody's going to give you an airport, they're going to give you this $30-something million airport. Would you not take it? And my recent thought on that was, well, if they gave it to us, can we sell it? If it's worth $30 million, and, I don't know, but I'm going to have to imagine that we can't sell it.
I don't know that, but it is a funny situation. I mean, I remember, so I go to meetings. I mentioned the General Assembly's only in January to April, January to March, but starting in June, they have interim meetings. So they can't vote on anything from June until December. But it was years and years ago, I was sitting in one of those committee meetings, and they were like, one of the things we need to do is get $10 million in the budget next year. It might have been 2018, whenever it was, to build an airport in Gallatin County. And I remember reaching out to some people in Gallatin County. I'm like, y'all know you're getting an airport? And they're like, no. Like, how's it going to be funded? All these things. And so it really was kind of like, we're going to pay $10 million. Congress is going to send some money, another 10 or whatever it was. And we're going to build an airport in Gallatin County. It was just kind of like, that's what we're going to do. And I remember sitting in one of those meetings and seeing that and started reaching out to Gallatin County elected officials, and they were different than who they are now. And I was like, do y'all know about this? No. So there are some things like
Gifted
so
at gunpoint, Henry.
But something that's interesting, and I'm not the absolute expert on this.
It seems to me that they gave us the job of running an airport. They didn't actually give us an airport.
So that's what I was about to mention. I'm not the expert on this, but what I've been told by a county judge in eastern Kentucky that has a super nice airport, you have to fly over top of a mountain before you land, which is kind of scary because you don't even see it. You have to like go over a mountain and then down. But super nice little airport, though, in a rural county. And what he told me that day was if it's under 5,000 feet, you do not have to have 24/7 staff. If it's 5,001 foot, you do have to have somebody staffing it all the time. And I don't know the answer to that question. Who pays for the person who staffs it? And I think the one here is over 5,000 foot. I mean,
that's been my whole concern with it in general is I've not heard anybody say what it's going to cost to run it. I mean, I'd like to know the difference in what we think it's going to generate in revenue versus what it's going to cost to own and operate it. On top of the fact that I'm still have yet to get an answer from anybody on what we've already spent throughout the construction process and things.
I'm not sure I do know that they've gotten a lot of state and federal dollars.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's a lot of potential there. But yeah, what would always worry me is we have a lot of what's called SPGEs, special purpose governmental entities, things like your extension, your ambulance, your health, your libraries, the
Special
airport,
taxing districts.
Special taxing districts. And in 2013, then Adam Edlin was the auditor, and House Bill 1, the most important bill, the priority bill, House Bill 1, was really redefining special taxing districts as special purpose governmental entities, SPGEs, which all do have taxing authority. And I believe that AIR is one that could be created. I think it would have to be created by the fiscal court. But that's something that if I lived here, I might have a concern. Are we going to get another taxing district? And I've got that pulled up on my laptop, but I don't have it. What all SPGEs
Pretty concerned about that sort of thing myself.
So that would be a section of the property tax.
It would be. So like when you get your
It'd
property
be like where you get the library takes their portion and
Yeah,
the
so
extension office.
that's
or
what
whatever
I was
the
going to
different-
say. I mean, not to throw any stones here. I love the library, but we could probably nearly pull from the library fund to fund the airport
Actually,
fund.
back to the county you were talking about, the rural county that had the nice little airport, do you have any idea if that airport cost them, cost them money to own and operate, or if it
What
was
county?
self-sustaining?
I don't mind. I mean, it was in Harlan County. They've got a beautiful rural airport,
yeah,
a nice.
sure.
I mean, they've got a big welcome center. When I say big, I mean
Like a
it's not-
terminal.
yeah, I mean it's
The
not
same-
as big as this building we're in terms of you all built a nice big warehouse here, but I mean it was just a really like log cabin, nice area, and I would have to think that back in the day it was pretty used with the coal industry being what it was, and the difference in Harlan County and Gallatin County is Harlan County still has over 30,000 people. Back then it probably had much more, but it's just a really nice airport, and we didn't get into the financials of it, but I did know that. I mean, he told me that they would rent hangar spaces for $20,000 a month. I mean, so they've.
Holy smokes.
I
So-
guarantee
Hangar
you.
space that somebody told us the county was renting here, they thought they were renting for $300 a month
Yeah.
for
It,
a
might
hangar
have
for
been
a small
20,000 a year.
So
instead
all
of a
that
month,
rent
but I
that
was
we're-
thinking it was 20,000 a month. Maybe it was 20,000 a year, but
All the rent that we're seeing, like in that contract, that's the wholesale rate for them to re-rent. So they're essentially renting the whole airport with hopes that they can double or triple their money. So maybe that does
Yeah, I
need
was
to be
talking
looked
about
at.
the hangar that the county built out there that they're renting each spot out in. Somebody I think said they thought that it was $300 a month per
I don't know.
space.
Maybe
Well, if that's
maybe
the
been a
case-
different size plane.
shoot, if that's the case, I need some storage facility. I mean, $300 a month for a space that size is a pretty good deal when you look at
Well, I
square
mean,
footage you're
I
going to
think-
get.
Yeah, I don't know how many square
I
feet
don't have a
that.
plane, but I
Start
might go
taking your
get
boat
some.
out there.
I don't know how many square feet that was, but yeah, it did seem pretty cheap for the building already being built. But there was only 10 spots, I guess, and they're all rented.
Pretty confident. Was it city limits or sit at what's core in them?
City limit storage.
City
over there, I
limit
think.
storage. I don't think you can get a third of that space for half that price or for double that price.
Yeah, like I said, I don't know how big of a space that is in the hangar out there.
Airplane's not small. It
Yeah, I
can,
mean, a small private plane like a little Cessna or something's not
Probably fit in
huge.
this
I mean,
room.
they're not very big.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
What
But
about?
not-
Are there other airports besides Harlan that you've been to that are
Oh yeah,
out in the middle of nowhere like here that got a nice airport?
yeah. I mean,
Union County has one. I know.
I mean, there's a bunch of general aviation airports, and they've become a infrastructure. In Kentucky has really been elevated in the last 4 years. They've had task force called the Multimodal Task Force. I actually serve on a board, Kentuckians for Better Transportation. Kentucky has invested a lot more money recently in riverports, rail, and general aviation airports, more so than just your traditional roads and bridges. They're really prioritizing investing in small airports, and
So
yeah, I mean, I've been to
a
one
general
in Frankfort.
aviation airport would be like what we have out here. So
Yes.
just a small, like,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, I've been Harlan.
Georgetown, I
Christian,
think, has one, don't they?
Laurel. Yeah, there's a bunch of them. I was just thinking of the ones that I've been to.
Yeah.
But and the reason I've been to them is not because I'm fortunate enough to fly around in private planes, but they're pretty popular space to have. Before I worked in the policy side, I worked in the political side, and they are popular places to have like a campaign rally. So like when you look at like U.S. Senate candidate Andy Barr that just won the Republican primary, kind of in that final day, he was going and having, I don't know if he flew into them or drove, but in a rural county, you don't have a lot of spaces to go have like a campaign event. I mean, you're more than likely not going to do a campaign event at the school because that's a public property. And
So they done them in the
extension.
terminals or
So
just
they'll do 'em in,
outside
like,
or
the
what?
terminal.
Well, I
Yeah,
think
so
Trump's
they'll-
made that pretty popular. Actually, is that he did a lot of his campaign stops. Hop
A lot
off
of
the
them did.
plane, have a rally.
On the
That
tarmac.
was one
Go
of
to the
the
next
when,
one.
when I was
Well-
at college at UK. That was one of the first of political events I went to. Was at the Lexington airport, and it was a presidential candidate. Just flew in, landed his plane. All of us were out there in one of the hangars, and he came out. It was Paul Ryan. I guess it was vice president candidate, but either way, like he come out and did his thing there. So it's for a long time now. I'm not saying that's a good reason to have one, but say political aside, it could potentially be a good community
I
venue
don't
because
think Trump
it
could
is.
land his plane on our runway.
Probably not, but the same applies to business though. People will fly in, have their meeting
Yeah.
right there, and then they'll both fly out.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at, first of all, what I have learned in the 10 years that I've been doing what I'm doing and in Frankfort, very few people know the powerhouse of Gent, Kentucky. Like people have no idea what Highway 42 contains. No idea. I mean, it's amazing to me what Gallatin and Carroll County have down here that the rest of the state has no clue what NAS, Nucor, KU, Dow Corning, all those industries that's down here. But yeah, in theory, when you think of the global presence that some of those factories have, Nucor in particular, their global presence, I mean, I would think it would easily make sense to fly in and have a meeting there with people all over the world potentially could fly in and land there and have their meeting and be gone the next hour.
And that kind of
in
goes
theory,
to
it could be a really cool thing.
the conversation we have on kind of incentive to bringing new business. You know, if you are a global business or even more, you know, the continental U.S., you travel by plane. Mm-hmm. That's a good incentive to have. Maybe not worth the money that we've maybe paid or not paid, but it definitely does maybe entice the bigger businesses.
Yeah, now that I don't know. Like, I don't know who pays for the person to be out there staffing it. I mean, I've asked that question in Owen County. We've got the Taj Mahal of the courthouse. You know, we've got a giant courthouse the circuit clerk's office there, but now that they don't do driver's licenses, I'm like, are the only people in there the few employees and the criminals that have to go to court in there? And we got that massive courthouse. I'm like, who do you think pays the utility bills and the water and all that? I assume
how did that get paid for?
So the state paid to build a lot of courthouses all over the Commonwealth, and I think that was back in Paul Patton's days. And I mean, you drive all over rural Kentucky. I mean, which I've been to all 120 counties and probably most of the 400 cities. Gallatin County is one of the few that doesn't have a big brand new courthouse.
Would that be grant money, I'm assuming, that people got, or how would that?
I think it was just, I mean, I think there was some grant money incentives, and then I'm sure the counties, I don't know this to be a fact, but I'm sure the counties probably had to get a bond to build part of it, but the state probably said, we'll give you X amount if you...
That's been a topic. I know Kentucky came on here and talked about it, and in this week's newspaper.
Well, I know there's a difference in the courthouse funding versus, you know, that's separate from any county funding. It's the AOC,
Administrative Office of the Courts. Yeah. But
I just mean most of
the
that's
structure.
state funding that comes from the state, I think.
It is, but I just mean the structure, like the structure of our courthouse. Like, I'm not talking about the money that pays the people to be inside of it. I just mean, what does it cost to heat and cool a building that size? And I mean, I'm sure the state's not paying that. I'm sure
if you look at our courthouse, we might be able to build a monster that we can heat and cool with this efficiency upgrades, because ours is built in the 1800s or something.
It's maybe the second oldest in the state.
Which I think is why we still have it.
It's a cool thing.
Yeah, it is really cool. I mean, we were just talking about it today, pulling up when you come to the end of 35. I mean, just boom, it's right there.
It used to be turned around.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. The town used to be down what is now underneath the river, and the courthouse was setting up above everything else, facing downward. But I'm confident everybody listening to this show is wishing we would have asked you something just a second ago. So I'm going to ask you. You mentioned they don't do driver's licensing at the clerk's office anymore.
Yeah.
But there is a bill.
Terrible.
There is a bill in Frankfort. I'm sure you're well familiar with it. Did that bill have any success? Are we going to be able to get a license in our county anymore? What's the deal there?
No, so there was legislation filed, but it did not pass. And I kind of mentioned it at the beginning. Like, Congress, you have 2 years. So if you file a bill on January 1, it lasts until December 31 of the following year. Every bill that was filed, and there were 1,000 bills, over 1,000 bills and resolutions filed in the 60-day legislative session. Whatever didn't pass is dead. It can't happen now. It's done. You have to wait until the next session, and it would have to be refiled. So there was the closest one that got to passing was Senate Bill 7. Senator Aaron Reed in Shelby County, he filed a bill that was an option for different county offices. So it didn't have to be the circuit clerk. It could be the county clerk, the fiscal court, the sheriff. There was an option for kind of any elected official, basically, to want to take that on to issue driver's licenses. And when it went away, what's important, the reason it went away from the clerks was because of the real IDs. And what's also important to note there is the real ID law was passed federally in like 2004 or 5. It was after 9/11.
So what is the difference with the real ID that was made it to where the local
So they
governments couldn't issue the IDs
So
anymore.
it was a whole system, and these county circuit clerks had to get all new systems that would be integrated into sending all this information, I guess, to the federal government. And it was just the way their old systems wouldn't work with what the new real IDs required. So they were having to get all new systems and training. And the bill that passed, because there was a federal mandate, and then that mandate was basically they said we're not going to implement that for another 2 years, another 5 years, and it got pushed back from like 2015 until just May of 2025, I believe, is when it officially went into effect. But Kentucky didn't pass a bill until 2016, and then Governor Bevin vetoed it, and then they passed it again in 2017, and it ultimately became law because the Fed said you had to, or you weren't going to be able to get on a plane without having a passport. So we had to do it based on federal law. But it did make all this new systems and trainings, and they tried to roll it out, and there was just a lot of problems. And circuit clerks, what they're statutorily, constitutionally mandated to do is the court system. And they had to keep the court system going, and ultimately they were spending all this time and money trying to do driver's license, which they weren't constitutionally mandated to do. They're supposed to get, if you've committed a crime or family court or whatever, they needed to get those court dockets cleared, and they were spending all this time and money on trying to do driver's license, and it just got to a point where it didn't work. So the state went to these transportation cabinet to do the real IDs, and the original goal, I believe, was to have a lot of regional offices. And then COVID happened not long after, and it just seemed like that came to a halt. This session, they did pass some budget language to build more regional offices. I think Oldham County is going to get one, and I believe there was going to be another in Northern Kentucky, I believe. But they did.
It was a pain up there at times. You know that you'd have to wait 2 or 3 hours or something to get in. And
it is
the drive up there from here.
We get a lot of resolutions for Farm Bureau, and we have policy supporting bringing driver's licenses back to the county level. It's just something we haven't been able to get done. A lot of legislators are paying attention. They're not ignoring it or brushing it off. It's just they're trying to figure out what makes the most sense for the long term. Does it make sense to have all of this duplicative technology in all 120 counties, or is there a regional model if we had enough? Like if there was one built on the Owen-Gallatin County line to service, like if it was built out there by the Speedway to service Carroll, Owen, and Gallatin, and then if Trimble and Henry could go to Oldham. I think that's the goal. It's just not there yet. But to answer your question that you answered, none of the bills passed, but there was some budget language to bring more of the regional hubs being built around Kentucky.
That would honestly be fine. I mean, I most recently finally got my real ID here at our local library, and I think that would even be sufficient if they just had a bill where it was mandatory to have one per county per month. You know,
You got your real ID at the library?
Yeah, I got mine there.
That's interesting.
Yeah, you can do that twice a year. I think they do it. If they did it once a month,
Oh, okay, they do it.
Yeah, you go
Specific.
You go get your picture taken,
Okay.
fill out the paperwork, and then it comes in the mail.
See, and an
you
important
need a
thing
woman in your life, Henry. So how did you go do that?
So the important
That's what
thing.
happened.
I actually
me.
have my real ID.
There
My
you go,
license was
listeners.
expired for, I don't know, months before I was like, I'm going to have to go do this.
Statute of limitations. Hopefully that's passed.
Yeah.
And they have like mobile units that are supposed to go into counties to help. But the other thing I didn't mention in those bills were those were only to address renewals. Like a big problem also is it was kind of the perfect storm of we passed a bill kind of late, COVID happened, and then we also passed a bill last year that moved the 16-year-old to get a driver's license to 15-year-old to start the process. So you also had a whole nother year's worth of individuals that all of a sudden are like, I'm 15, I can go now and take my driver's test. Senate Bill 7 didn't address the new driver's test for all the young people. And that's where we hear a lot of complaints is, I had to go 3 hours for my kid to take a driver's test. So Senate Bill 7 didn't even address that issue.
I didn't even realize that 15-year-olds can drive now.
They can start the process. So essentially, when all of us, we were like the first generation. You all actually might have been, because Zach and I are 2 years younger.
Yeah, I was a 16-year-old who got my real license at 16 and a half.
We had to wait till we were 17. So we were like the first group to have to do that, right?
So
like where you had an intermediate for.
Yeah. What are
so many
15-year-olds doing now?
They start that same process. So it didn't change your process of having to go so many months with a permit and then so many months with an intermediate. It just moved it from 16 to 15 when you can start.
So a 15-year-old
So when you
can
turn-
drive with their parents?
Mm-hmm. And when you turn 16 now, you have your full license, assuming you passed all your tests.
At 16.
So it just moved it all forward a year.
Yeah, I'm fine with that, I guess.
This is an informative podcast. I'm learning stuff here today.
Yeah. So that bill passed last year. Majority Floor Leader Stephen Rudy, he was very passionate about that bill, so he got that done.
I wish they'd have done that when I was getting my license, because I was a year behind everybody else getting my license. I was,
Yeah.
I think I was one of the first people in the state to be affected by that.
Oh, you had to
intermediate
do
thing.
the intermediate.
Yes. My birthday is January 4th. I'm pretty sure it went into effect on January 1st.
We're like 7 months apart,
Yeah.
and you had to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
me-
where I skipped a grade, I was already like a senior before I could drive anyway.
So I got my license about the time that you got the, it's going to be a year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Zach and I are young too. I mean, June and July, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, we were all seniors before we could even drive by ourselves.
Hitching rides to class.
Speaking of statute of limitations, I don't really recall that setting you back that much.
I rode with JR, I had JR or Scotty after school. I'd ride with
Yeah.
Scotty a lot of the time, just all my buddies had their license. I just didn't.
Well, what else we got? I mean, we've covered a lot of topics in the past few weeks. What else we got to get some professional insight on here?
Oh, no. What else were we? I feel like we had more ideas yesterday.
Well,
I don't know if you're the guy to ask or not, but we've talked about, can school boards help counties with funds?
What do you mean by that?
that's a
Like,
Gracie question.
Yeah.
Can-
So one of the issues with the Speedway, losing that in lieu of payment money, the county is now getting $420,000 a year. But if they go to the regular tax roll, the county's going to get 180.
It's something like that, yeah.
But the school-
120 or something.
Is currently getting nothing from the Speedway property, but they're going to be getting like 1.2 million. Is there anything that like the county could get some of that money from the school? Is that something that happens in county governments?
So I don't think.
Or how are tax rates changed?
Yeah. So I'm very happy to talk about property
It's just
tax rates
the
because
school
that's
board and
Which is probably
and
the
fiscal
easiest way to
court,
go
right?
about doing
Can change the rate.
So
Yeah,
the
so-
school board can change the rate and
Yeah.
the fiscal court could change the rate. So if they just got along and said, hey, we're going to do a 4-year deal to let the county figure this out, where we'll lower ours and you can raise yours, and residents aren't affected
Yes,
at all.
that could happen. Now, in terms of could the school use a part of their budget to fund county government, I wouldn't think so. But now when you look at the SPGEs, county governments can fund those SPGEs. So there's counties that do not have a, let's say it's the,
Can it go the other way around?
I don't think so. Like, I don't think the library can send a portion of their money. I could be wrong, but I do know that if the library had a shortfall, the county could send money to that district.
Interesting.
But those boards could vote, could vote to lower their rate.
Yeah.
Yes,
At-
the school
At
board
the
can
same
absolutely.
time, yeah, the county could vote to raise their rate.
Sounds to me like it'd be incredibly reasonable.
But
Well, what we were discussing earlier, and looking over the school's budget, I don't know that they really have. They probably want that money pretty bad too.
yeah.
That'd be the fight.
Well,
So-
that goes back to your government never has enough money.
Yeah.
Well, and what I also
I
want,
said that, and I stand by it.
what I will comment too
They
is
can
like
never have enough money.
each taxing district can only raise their rate up to 4%. So that's what I want to talk about from like Farm Bureau. One of our number one priorities, and it's been a priority since the 1970s, is what we call House Bill 44. So in a special session in 1979, House Bill 44, or I guess it wasn't special session, but in 1979, yeah, they didn't have odd sessions back then, so it had been special. But House Bill 44 passed, which limits what a taxing district can bring in to 4% plus new growth on property taxes. So when you look at the state of Kentucky, The state of Kentucky in 1979, their state property tax rate was 31.5 cents per $100 value. If they can only bring in 4% plus new growth of revenue, or it would be subject to recall. So that rate has decreased from 31.5 cents down to this year 10.6 cents per $100. So our property tax rate at the state level has dropped from each individual from 31.5 to 10.6.
So their total revenue can only increase by 4% per year.
Plus new growth. So like if there's a new house, whatever new is built. But yes, if nothing new got built and they were collecting $100 in revenue, the most they can collect the next year is $104. That goes down to, I think, everything except for health. I don't think health is under like a health district. They're unlimited, I'm pretty sure. Like your county government, your school
So
boards.
in other words, they can't raise the assessments
No.
by more than.
Assessments and rates. So the way your property tax works are assessments and rate. So your assessment can be raised. It constitutionally has to be raised to fair market value, fair cash value.
But I mean, if they raise the assessments too much, then
rates
they
have
would
to go
pass
down.
the 4%.
Then that
Increase in
triggers
revenue.
the rates would have to go down. That's why the
Okay.
rate at the state
Okay.
levels went from
I got you.
31.5 to 10.6 is because your value of your property has went up so much more. That goes to the school systems and the county fiscal government, everything. So if your fiscal court, the rate, if your assessments keep going up, which they are because property increases in value,
Right.
if it's above 4%, so if they brought in 100 and now they're going to bring in 105, that would make them subject to recall, meaning that you all as citizens can ultimately petition to put that tax increase on the ballot. It happens all the time, all over the state. Now, I'm not familiar with hardly any that ever pass. If they get petitioned, a LaRue County school just did one, it got beat 3-1 because the property taxpayers didn't want to pay more in taxes. So they petitioned it. The thing is, most don't ever petition. So like the question that I keep asking is, the state's obviously adhering to that. It's dropped from 31.5 to 10.6. County fiscal courts adhere to that. These special purpose government entities, they're not elected. They are appointed. School board is elected. Your other SPGEs, your library,
Soil conservation here. I think that's what it is.
some are, yeah, and some soil conservation are elected, but like when you look at your health, your ambulance, there's all kinds. Most counties don't implement but about 4 or 5. But those are appointed positions. And I question, and I don't know
That
the
have
answer
the
to.
authority to levy.
Yes, but
more
I
taxes
but I
on-
question
on the
like
citizens.
like when I look at like Owen County, you know, if the fiscal court's going to collect more than 4%, they're going to lower that rate because they don't want it to go to the ballot box. They don't want it to be petitioned because they know they'll probably get voted out along with voting down the tax increase. But if you serve on one of these SPGE boards, you're appointed, not elected. Are they lowering their rates?
That's a good question for here. I mean, our library seems to have quite the surplus and
Yeah.
quite a lot of money in the bank.
And should they be petitioned? Like if they are collecting more than 4% revenue from the previous year, excluding new growth, you all as citizens can go get, I think you've got 45 days to collect 5,000 signatures, or 10% for you all would be 10% of
I was
the
about to say
voters.
5,000 signatures.
Everybody in the
That's
county's got a
practically
sign.
everybody in the county.
5/8.
So I'll tell you why they did 5,000 signatures is a good thing for for Jefferson County,
Yeah,
Fayette
yeah.
County.
Right.
So it used to be you had to collect 10% of signatures from the last presidential election. So if you had 5,000 people vote, you would need 500 signatures to get that onto the ballot. In Jefferson County, that was a huge number. So they said 5,000 or 10%, whichever is less.
So we'd probably need like 300 or something here.
Yeah.
Probably you wouldn't need
Well,
a
we're
whole
gonna have
lot.
to do some research.
So if you all feel
Yeah,
that
that's an
they're
interesting
Well,
thing to look
I mean,
up.
there's
but-
nothing that would shed greater light on an SPGE or whatever
Yeah.
you're referring to as getting too much money than if it
Yeah.
goes to the ballot.
So
Yeah.
let me tell you another funny thing about this, though, is there are also certain taxing districts are required to, if they're going to exceed that 4%, they have to publish it. So you as citizens know to go petition it. It's not mandated how they publish it. So you will see some people publish in a newspaper that say,
Public notice section, fine
public
print.
notice section. But what they'll say is, I'm just going to use this as an example. Gallatin County Library is lowering their tax rate from 10 to 9.8. So you read that as a citizen, you think, wow, they're finally lowering their rate. But in reality, the assessments went up so much, they should actually lower the rate from 10 to 9.5. So they actually didn't lower it below that 4% threshold. And I mean, I use Gallatin County Library. I'm not picking on them. When this actually happened it was a school, and they posted in the paper, and people were like, what do you mean they've exceeded the 4%? In the paper, it says they lowered their rate. But the assessments went up so much, they should have lowered their rate more. So the way that the state representative at the time explained it to his constituents was, if it's posted in the paper, odds are they've exceeded the 4%, which is why it was posted, because otherwise they wouldn't have had to post it.
I guarantee in the past 5 years we've had SPGs exceed the 4%. I mean, assessments have just had to have happened.
Definitely something worth looking into.
For sure.
That would probably explain the budget surplus.
How long do you have? I mean, I guess we'd have
40
to figure out the dates and when that stuff.
So for if it was up to Farm Bureau, our policy is anything above 4% is automatically subject to recall. We've not gotten that passed, but there's been a bill filed. A senator out of Davis County got it past the Senate, but it didn't pass the House. That would make it automatically subject to recall. So any entity that raised above the 4% would automatically go to the voters, but that didn't pass. So it's what current law is, which is 45 days.
But
we did get that increase from 30 to 45 about 7 or 8 years ago.
But we've just learned through all our recent shows, we just concluded budget season. So our 45-day window would be now.
Was
right?
when that window
Most likely.
starts. Is that at the beginning of the fiscal year for the county, or the beginning of the regular year?
I don't know that, to be honest. I should.
Because property taxes are collected at the at the end of the year.
KRS 132 dot something. So if you go to KRS 132 and look through there and they're titled, it should say when that triggers. Because I don't know when that 45
look that
days.
up, try to stay on top of that.
Yeah, I don't know if that 45 days triggers based on when they vote to increase it or based on the start of the.
So for a
Well,
county,
I would just be thrilled if we managed to save a few tax dollars from a podcast.
If Henry single-handedly affected lower taxes, your
But
head would be this big.
But I do think like what a lot of people don't realize though is when you write a check to the sheriff's office each year for your property tax, people don't understand where the majority of it's going. Most people, fiscal court usually gets blamed, and usually they're less than 10%. It varies by county.
Yeah.
The highest I've ever seen is like 35 cents per 100. Most are around 10. Owen
It's
County's
not
like
much for
Owen County's like
fiscal
12.2 cents per
We're
$100.
8.5, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't it?
So one thing I would tell
that.
people listening is, one, look at your tax bill, where your tax dollars are going, for one.
tell you where they go in Gallatin County. That's to the school.
That's every county. The majority of it goes to schools. But the other thing I would say is most people blame the rate. But like I mentioned, you also have the valuation.
Mm-hmm.
That's the second part of that. It's assessment and its rate. It's not just tax rates going up. They can only impact the rates. The value of your property is set by the PVA. And unfortunately, the Constitution...
The state mandated on
the state mandates within what percentage range does it have to be from what they think it should be.
Yeah.
And it's in the 90 percentile. And if you don't hit that as a PVA, you could be removed from office, and the Department of Revenue from Kentucky could come in and do it. And that's happened in some counties.
that has happened?
Yes.
They've removed PVAs for not hitting that threshold?
One PVA just voluntarily stepped down last year because he refused to raise assessments by what DOR said he should. So
I
he
get a
stepped
feeling
down.
he has other political ambitions.
No, he didn't run for anything. It was a three-way primary, though.
so
Nothing
even
else?
if
In
even
that
if
county,
PVA rates,
I bet that was east of Lexington.
It was east of Lexington and south, but it was that PVA. He just said, "I'm not doing it. I'm not doing. My people are hurting. I'm not."
but
I know
even if he
exactly where he's
raises the
coming from.
assessment, the county would have to lower the tax bill, wouldn't they?
If it increased above 4% or be subject to recall. That's the thing. A lot of people think they cannot exceed 4%, and they think it's their personal bill. It's not their personal bill. It's the collective.
Yeah.
So your personal bill might go
Through the roof.
if somebody else tore down their house and now they no longer have a home, they just have a bare piece of land. So it's the total revenue, and it still can exceed 4%, it would then just be subject to recall.
Now, for county revenue, like an occupational tax or payroll tax increase, that's not subject to that 4%.
No, that's completely different. Occupational
So it's
tax.
just
I do
property
think
tax.
I do think they have a cap on what your occupational rate can be. I believe there's an overall cap, but yeah, property tax is the only one that is impacted. That assessments go up every year, so the rate goes down because land increases in value.
There you go. That's how those percentages don't get to 100%. Now you talk about percentages. If you keep taking a percent, I guess as the PVA goes up, the county has to go down. Correct?
As the PVA
Only if their total
assessments go up.
revenue is over a 4%
Over 4%.
increase.
The way to
still-
say what
growth.
you're saying is that Henry's continually been saying what you
There
were,
has
you were
not
getting
been-
me to come around.
I
is that-
guarantee you can go look, and our property tax rate has not decreased in our lifetime.
No,
Probably not.
no, probably not.
Unless
But-
the school board. The school
but-
board
but-
actually might have lowered it once in our lifetime a little bit. I'm not sure.
But that also means with certainty that every single property assessment in our county, excluding new construction, has not doubled. You know, like
In 1 year.
But we keep
4% per year is a pretty. I mean, that's a pretty good increase. I mean, that's more than the average inflation.
yeah.
So I mean, that's you're going up. If we're talking about,
Historical average, yes. Recent average, no. But yeah,
I mean, I bet how many years have we had even recently where they said that the inflation was over 4%?
I'd
Now,
love to have
that's a whole
somebody
nother-
explain to us
That's
how
a whole
exactly
that's a whole other ordeal because
that's
how they
new bag of
calculate that
worms.
is definitely not accurate
Yeah.
in my
What they
mind.
say
Everywhere-
inflation's been, I don't believe.
Every time I reach for my wallet, I'm like, it ain't 4%.
I'll go along with that
Hey,
too.
but
but-
before we get off the property tax, I do want to say something because PVAs get a lot of blame for raising assessments. And we did kind of mention the state has mandates on what percentage they have to hit. But it's not just statutory, it's constitutional. And in the Constitution, under Section 172, is where it states they have to assess it based on fair cash value. So they have to assess it based on what would a willing seller and a willing buyer pay. Section 172A is where we do, for farmers, have an agriculture and horticulture rate. So farmland is valued differently. It doesn't have to be just traditional fair cash value. But I mention that just to say, like, we hear, like, that's probably the number one thing I get called about every single year around this time of the year because people are getting their notices, is complaining about their property taxes and their valuations. But the PVAs are somewhat handcuffed. But there are a lot of
When you say-
procedures to go in and protest what your value is. And I don't want to be defending them because I don't like paying them either.
A lot of
But I
people
do
do.
want to just say, like, PVAs, you know, I don't think some of them, or at least a lot of them that are friends of mine, they're not just like, I want to raise Kyle's home $100,000 just, you know, for the heck of it. And I'm just making that number up. But I mean, a lot of them, they've either been told by the state they have to because they've fallen below what the state believes the value should be, or that constitutional mandate that they do assessment at fair cash value. And some people get themselves in trouble. I want to say that too. And I'll just use one example where if you put your house for sale and you want to sell your home for $1 million and it's only assessed for $500,000 and you sell that home, and you and I have talked about this before, fair cash value should be what it's sold for. It's like,
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Right, like that's the
I
true
had an
fair cash
issue with the
value.
PVA one time where I had purchased a property off the open market. It was listed for sale for like, I don't even know, 8 months, way longer than anything should be on the market. And I ended up purchasing it for X amount of dollars, and it was assessed for like twice that much. So I went during the time frame, you know, where you go to dispute
protested.
your assessment. And I mean, I thought like it, you know, had always been for me in the past. I was like, I'll just take my settlement statement in there and have my assessment lowered to what I paid for it. And they proceeded to tell me that I needed an appraisal. And I was like, I don't think we're on the same page here. Like I I don't need to get someone's opinion of what the fair market value might be, because I am telling you what the market value is. I just paid it off the open market.
I
So
agree with
it's
you.
like, yeah,
I mean,
there's,
technically
I think, I don't know where the disconnect is here, but
Yeah.
this
Past-
is the market
past
value. I just
tense.
proved it was.
That would
you're
have
right.
to be an
Yeah.
incredibly valuable comp.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Whoever did appraise
Like,
that.
Yeah. Which the deal with that, in my experience, was always that if it was a forced sale, like a foreclosure auction or something, selling at the courthouse door or something, then they can't use that, which
Yeah.
I understand, because
Right.
that's
That's
a
fair.
different ordeal. But this was a property that was actively listed for sale on the open market for like maybe a year. I don't know, at least 6 months.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the market value. You don't need an appraisal to prove market,
Everybody had
to
their
get an
opportunity to
opinion.
buy it.
Did you
Yeah.
win? Did you win or lose that
I
protest?
eventually got it lowered to that. I think, but
you go.
there was a whole there was some other stuff too.
Now, you did say earlier that property tax is the only tax that local governments can enforce, right?
It's one of a few. Like, they can't do a sales tax. That's the big thing. It would take a constitutional mandate to implement a sales tax. And there's been bills that have been discussed in Frankfort but have never passed, because some local governments say, I'm tired of raising property tax. Like, I can't, that's the only thing I can do. I don't have a lot of industry. Look at Owen County. We don't have the occupation that Gallatin and Carroll has. They're like, so all we can do is just increase insurance premium tax, which is a tax on your insurance bill. So sometimes when your insurance goes up, it's not just your insurance, it's also the fact that you might have a new tax or an increased tax on it.
So that's a loophole
it's
to
property
tax
tax.
property. What you're
So-
insuring is property, they tax that.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a good way to put it. But they, it's tough for local government. So there was some discussion like, well, let's allow a local government to implement a sales tax to where they can choose to, rather than keep raising property taxes or not being able to lower them to fund the government. Maybe they can put a 1% sales tax on, and raise some revenue that way. But those bills never passed because citizens just didn't believe they would ever lower property or any other taxes. They just saw it as they're just going to add to the taxes. But I believe those bills that were filed, and they stopped even filing them because they weren't passing. I do believe that they had some type of trigger, like you can only do a sales tax if you lowered one of your other taxes, I believe is what they were saying. But those bills never passed. But essentially, what I was saying kind of at the start of the show was they can't implement a sales tax locally. You can only have a state sales tax.
What about taxes on like a water bill or something like that? Is that something a local government can do?
So I'm trying to think on a water bill.
I've looked on the water bill, and there's actually it says like LT on it or something, which I would assume is like local tax or something. There is some tax on our water bills.
There's some you can and some you can't. So like there was a county out in West Kentucky that actually got sued because they tried to put a 911 fee on a utility bill, and that utility company, and it was electric, not water, sued the county, and I think they won, I believe, or the county just dropped it, decided not to put it on. So there's some rules around what you can and you can't, but I'm not an exact expert on which can and which can't. I do know there can't be sales tax on residential utilities if it's your first home. If it's your second home, you do pay a 6% sales tax on that electricity. So if you have
Is that the same for rental properties?
not if it is, you can have it, your renter, if that is their primary residence, would fill out a document with you as the owner of the rental property that they are the primary resident, and you would be exempt from that. There is a form.
Yeah.
that
Better
you
take
can
notes of
complete.
that, bud.
Well, I don't supply utilities. Well, at least not electric.
We filled
To
one of those
any
out with Southern
rentals.
States for propane.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was part of House Bill 8 that passed in like 2018, I believe it was, that put maybe it's 2020 or 2020, all these taxes. Anyway, they all run together, but it was House Bill 8 that they put a sales tax on residential utilities for utilities if they're not your primary residence. If it's your primary residence, your sales tax exempt. Just like food. So residential utilities is one of the largest sales tax exemptions. Food is probably the second largest, and then prescription medication is probably the third largest. that are exempt from sales tax. So if you go buy a steak that's not been cooked, you do not pay sales tax on that. If it's been prepared, if it's been cooked, ready to eat, you do pay a sales tax.
It's funny that you brought that up, and it just made me think of this. Not very long ago, I was buying a bottle of water at a gas station, and I noticed they charged me sales tax on it. Is a bottle of water
I guess
supposed
it's
to
ready
be
to-
subject to sales tax?
I wouldn't think so. No,
I
soda
didn't either.
is.
I
So
thought about
like-
it when I was paying. I was like, "Well, are we
that's
supposed to
what
be paying
those-
sales
so
tax
when-
on
Those
this?"
so-
extra minerals for taste, they
Yeah.
prepared that for you.
Well, so when you look at the sales tax statute, and I think sales tax statutes are like KRS 136, property is 132, and I think sales is 136 or 139 in the KRS statute. When it mentions food, what's not exempt is like candy, soda, ready-to-eat meals, and one other thing, but it's not water. I don't remember what
bottle
the
of
fourth.
water I was buying. That's why I,
I
thought
can't
of it.
remember.
I was
Maybe
like, I just
tobacco
paid
might
tax
be
on
the
that. I don't know
fourth
about that.
category, but so there's the sales and use tax exemptions. I mean, there's a lot of exemptions, but kind of the big three are residential utilities, food, and medicine.
Agricultural.
There's this
Yeah,
farm
That,
exemption too.
that one's very important too. That's a main priority for us. So I wasn't gonna mention that, but we do try to get more because not everything you buy. When you look at the agriculture sales and use tax exemption, it's a 7-page document that just the statute. When you go to the regulation, so you have statutes, which are your laws, and you have regulations, which are written by the government bureaucrats, not the politicians, the government bureaucrats. Those also have the effective law, and that's like a 13-page document because the state law just says agriculture inputs are sales tax exempt, and then it mentions like 7 pages worth of things. The reg is even longer because it goes on to say like tobacco trays are not sales tax exempt, but like tobacco
Seed is.
We could do a whole podcast on trying to understand how the regulatory side of law works with the bureaucrats.
One wouldn't catch it.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like I don't.
I feel like people
I don't know anybody
dedicate
who'd
their life
watch
to
it either.
figuring out all
So I
that.
mean,
Yeah.
so I just meant like so most bills like when you pass a bill, that is the state law that just kind of sets the parameters, and then it says Department of Agriculture shall promulgate administrative regulations. So like a good one that we just worked on and was a priority. You know, you asked this at the very beginning. I never answered it. Like what were a couple of Farm Bureau priorities? I'll tell you one of them was a tax credit for alternative aviation fuel. So countries in the European Union are looking at doing mandates that airplanes that fly to the European Union have to have a percentage of that fuel be renewable fuels. I mentioned we have Amazon, DHL, and UPS right here in Kentucky. If they want to land a plane, potentially, if the EU ever moves forward with what they're discussing, a part of their fuels will have to be renewable.
So does that
An
mean like
example would be like
ethanol?
ethanol, corn ethanol, soybean biodiesel. Very good for our farmers, right? Big market, new market potentially. So we passed a bill that would create a tax incentive for a company to locate here. It would be a up to $2.50 per gallon that they produce, manufacture here, tax credit if they use agriculture feedstocks. So that is
from Kentucky.
from Kentucky. So if they use your corn to convert to ethanol, to then convert to jet fuel, to sell to Amazon, the manufacturer of that fuel could be eligible for a tax credit. So we're trying to get somebody to locate
I'm gonna be honest with you.
in Kentucky.
From my experience with what fuel with much ethanol in it does to my small engines, I'm not too sure I'm gonna fly on jets with ethanol in them.
But
My weed eaters don't run too good.
now
Since they-
small engines do they do complain, but since it's been, I think since like 2006, there's been mandate on automobile manufacturers to manufacture engines that can run on higher ethanol. But
yeah, I just mean they break down a lot on my small engines. I don't know if I want to take that chance on a plane.
What's the corn deal right now? Are they trying to get ethanol, more
E15,
ethanol?
they're trying to get E15. So like right now, 10%, and that's a priority for us too at the national level. So like 10%, when you go to the gas station, like 10% of that fuel is ethanol, but there's been an executive order passed to allow for up to 15% ethanol, and that's been in place for a long time. But the law technically doesn't allow for a 15% ethanol blend year round. E15 would allow that, and the House just passed a bill that would allow gas stations to sell E15 year round. Or I guess maybe it'd mandate them to sell E15 year round.
I think that'd be good for corn. I don't know
It would
if
be
it'd
very
be good
good for
for the
corn.
people that own the engines that it's going.
Well, they have non-ethanol. Like when you get to a big water town, like if you go to Somerset, you'll see gas stations that say no ethanol added, and that type of fuel can be put in boats, for example, or weed eaters, anything else. But most of your fuel will have a 10% ethanol blend, and that if that were to pass, it would allow up to 15%. But it's pretty complicated because you also have these small refinery exemptions for the oil refiners that actually make the product, and those blending requirements. It's crazy complicated. It's over my head, but apparently the Senate has some issues with that. So that bill's on hold for the moment, but we'll see what we can get broken loose there. But
So I do have to ask you about one other bill. You referenced, I was alluding to all the bills that Farm Bureau worked on at the very beginning, but you got to tell us about I'm just going to refer to it as the Roundup bill, but tell us about the bill. I think there's some incredible misconceptions. It actually just failed, I think, as a part of federal policy in the most recent Farm Bill, but tell us about the bill that essentially it's holding accountability to the label is how I would phrase it. But tell us about that bill.
What was this, Senate Bill 199 or something?
yeah, Senate Bill 199, that was a priority for us. And on social media, it was like we were the devil because it was being called the Bayer Immunity Bill. And to be honest, Congressman Massey was who killed it at the federal level, saying it gave complete immunity to pesticide companies. I'm not sure what the federal language said exactly, so I won't speak to that. I'll speak to what we did in Kentucky that did pass and was vetoed by the governor and overridden and will become law. It was not immunity to pesticide companies. And this is probably going to be a long answer, so y'all just butt in here with questions as we go, because every legislator I talked to was a 30-minute to 60-minute conversation, so I'm going to keep it below that. But essentially, going back to the 70s, we have a law, the EPA and FIFRA. FIFRA is the acronym, Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, Rodenticide Act, whatever FIFRA stands for. That's roughly what it stands for. So FIFRA states that only the federal government, the EPA, can determine the label that goes on a pesticide. And a pesticide means pesticide, herbicide, all of them.
Whatever, chemical.
So the EPA is the only entity that they are mandated by law to study, review, and restudy these products every so many years. If enough people petition one, they can restudy it and relabel the product. That just happened with dicamba, for example. So they are the sole federal authority to regulate and approve a label and what has to be on the label. So if you ever buy a product, let's just say Roundup, you'll see like a 25-page label on the back that tells you how to use the product, the potential dangers of the product. So going back to the 70s up until 2015, they're operating with, there's the occasional complaint, but essentially they operated. They didn't like the EPA because the EPA did all these stringent reviews and cost them millions and millions of dollars to get a product on the market. But they were doing business. What changed in 2015 was a branch of the World Health Organization in France did a study on lifestyles and on products, and they studied hundreds of products. And then they labeled them, it was on the potential to cause cancer, the International Agency for Research on Cancer. They did the studies on mice. And they didn't do them the way that government regulators do them. And then they listed them. 1A was, it causes cancer. And then it went over here to like 5A, which was like, it doesn't cause cancer. So 1A were things like the most cancerous causing thing that they did a study on was the sun. All right, the sun is the most dangerous thing. Too much exposure to the sun, alcohol, tobacco, processed meats, and one other thing. Those were 1A groups. Group 2A were things they studied that they said were probable to cause cancer. They were probable to cause cancer. And in that list was glyphosate, which is an active ingredient in Roundup, working the night shift, drinking very hot beverages, red meat, and hair salons. So those 5 things are on the same list of likely to cause cancer. Right? Probable to cause cancer. Probable. That's a good word, not likely. Probable is what they use. So what happens right after that study comes out? A trial attorney finds somebody who had used Roundup. Monsanto was the manufacturer at the time, had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. This study done in France, which no country recognized it, not the European Union, not Australia, not America, nobody. They said that study was not, basically they just directly injected glyphosate into the bloodstream of mice and said it caused tumors. They also, for what it's worth, everyone can go look up the study. The placebo also caused tumors in the mice, not just the glyphosate and the red meat and the hair salon stuff. Anyway, after that, they sued Monsanto, the manufacturer of Roundup, which contains glyphosate, and that led to ultimately a settlement. And then from that, there were now over 170,000 lawsuits against Monsanto, or now Bayer, who owns Roundup with glyphosate in it. So those lawsuits were happening, and they were happening based on, when you manufacture a product, you have 3 duties. You have a duty to design, which is the problem, right? If these products cause cancer, the design of it's the problem, because their approved design is to harm pests, not people, not animals, nothing, or plants, not pests, not, like if Roundup kills pests, it does something it's not supposed to do. It's only supposed to kill plants. So the design of the product, and then you have to manufacture. You have a duty to manufacture the product according to the approved design. And then you have a duty to warn. So you have to warn of any potential dangers. So all 170,000 plus lawsuits against Roundup, they're saying they failed to warn them that this product could cause cancer based on this study done in 2015. The problem is they can't put anything on the label the federal EPA hasn't approved. So California looks at this study and they say, you're mandated to put a cancer label on Roundup because this study over in France. So they say, okay, we'll put a cancer label on Roundup. The federal EPA said, no, you won't. Federal EPA said, federal law says you can only place on the label what we have found.
Why would the federal government not want them to put a warning on there?
Because they've studied it since the 70s, and they say it is not likely, not probable to cause cancer when used at the approved rates. That's since the 70s. It's not the Trump administration. That goes back to the Carter administration. You've got Democrats, Republicans, Democrats again, Republicans again.
I'm sure there's other variables, but I at some point, I mean, don't quote me exactly on this, but I saw some statistics about one of the western states where, like, the farming, it's one of the bigger farming states, and they could maybe Iowa, and apparently their cancer rate is among the highest in the country, and it happens to coincide with the fact that the use of glyphosate in that state is also the highest in the country.
Well, I'm gonna jump in right there and say, could you requote the Class A or the 1As, the sun, alcohol, tobacco,
processed meat,
So, like, you look at the things that
So
farmers.
You're saying there's a lot of other factors that maybe that the
working
farming
the night
communities.
shift.
Yeah, I'm gonna say a farmer's highly exposed to the sun. Most of us drink a little alcohol. They're highly into red meats.
I guess you could say that the farmers in the whole country are also like that too. Why is it higher where the glyphosate's the highest in Iowa? If that's the state that it was referencing, I'm not sure.
So they're also, it is
farmers
Iowa.
everywhere are exposed to the other factors as well.
And they are looking at Kentucky too, because we have higher cancer rates, and they say that's because tobacco. Just because we grow tobacco here doesn't mean we consume the tobacco here, but they're saying we have higher cancers because tobacco. So that's interesting. But before I get off, I just want to say what the bill actually does. No, I just want to say what the bill actually does. So what the bill did in Kentucky was it said the EPA approved label is an efficient warning label for the product, because essentially that's what the federal law says. You cannot put anything on the label. Like California had to remove that state law because they lost. You cannot put anything on the label. So like when McDonald's hot cup of coffee lawsuit happens, now every cup of coffee you pick up says caution, may contain hot beverage. Probably says it right there on the side of that cup. And that was their warning label. These chemical companies cannot put caution may cause cancer because the EPA says it doesn't, and that product would be misbranded. So what the bill does, it says the EPA approved label is a sufficient warning label in the state of Kentucky, unless it was obtained using any false, intimidating, or misleading tactics, meaning that they tried to skew some of the health.
So you're,
Can the
so you're
EPA
saying the
be held
problem here
accountable?
was the federal
EPA can
government, not
change
the
it.
company. The company was fine with putting the warning on the label, but the federal government won't let them.
Correct.
So can the
Well, I'm not going to say the company wants to or not. I'm just saying the EPA has told them, and there are lawsuits where they have said, like, if you put anything that we haven't approved
I guess if I'm going
on
to
the label,
argue,
you cannot.
if I'm going to argue the opposite end of that point, I would say that regulatory capture on a federal level with, say, the EPA and a massive company like Bayer, Monsanto could be an issue, and maybe they are lobbying the EPA. You know,
But
maybe they
citizens-
have enough
can the EPA
influence over the
be held
EPA.
accountable?
No, the government is sovereign. Like so,
That's the problem.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but you understand what I'm saying, that with
I do
these
understand
massive
what you're saying.
corporations like that, they
But
may
this-
have the influence over the EPA to where that's just they're out where they're saying, well, we can't do it, but the EPA won't
but would they have that?
won't allow them to do it because they don't want the EPA to allow them to do it.
But would they have that for 50 years? Like that's the thing.
I
In
mean,
that
they're pretty-
scenario,
you're talking about a
but
pretty
citizens-
massive, powerful corporation
but
when
I
you're talking
mentioned-
about
but I mentioned,
Bayer,
but,
Monsanto.
but they don't have the power of, like dicamba I mentioned was re-registered. So when President Biden went in, there were enough citizens complaining about dicamba that they did a re-registration of that product. If enough citizens felt strongly,
I think
enough,
regulatory capture is a real concern, though, when you're talking about massive
when I want to
corporations.
mention one other thing that people don't realize around Roundup, you go buy a lawn and garden Roundup, glyphosate's not in it. Not been in it since 2023. It's not an active ingredient in the product anymore. And the other thing I want to mention is the only companies being sued are the companies that are manufacturing the product in America. They're only going after companies with American dollars here because that's the only money they're going to collect. So, and if you look,
I thought Bayer Monsanto wasn't even an American company. I thought they were
but they
owned
have
by,
manufacturing here.
oh, okay.
So
They're
they're-
owned by the
They're
German company or
headquartered.
something. Right?
Bayer is, yeah.
And that was one of the latest threats was they were going to quit doing that. And that was the national security thing from Trump that no, you have to make it.
You have to manufacture it here in America. Because without some of these products, they estimate a 70% yield decrease.
Might be a little drastic, but it is very important to agriculture.
But I think what's important is in the bill and the misinformation is it does not give blanket immunity.
It doesn't give any kind of immunity. It just simply says that your EPA approved label is protection for your company. Correct?
That you have a sufficient warning label if you
Yeah.
put the EPA approved
Yeah,
label.
and
Yeah,
I
it
have
seems like the EPA is the problem.
the EPA is the problem.
Essentially, what we're saying is, from a judicial standpoint, you look at the EPA approved label, the science of the American government, not the unscientific study from this group in France that is funded by the World Health Organization, which I think everybody brings into question since COVID, some of the stuff that WHO does. But that's essentially what the intent of that bill was, is we are going to look to the United States federal government.
How many states have
not
passed
the
a
state.
similar bill?
Georgia and North Dakota. I think Montana is working on it. Kansas, Missouri, several states.
Probably many more next
And
year.
the Supreme Court took it up on April 27th. They heard oral arguments April 27th, so they'll probably make a decision soon on do states even have the right to sue based on this product, because it is there is a federal preemption on states doing anything. The EPA under FIFRA has the sole authority to do it. So the Supreme Court will decide that ultimately.
No, it's all good in theory as long as the EPA is an honest and trustworthy organization.
That's what I think it's garbage that they're sovereign. Like, why can we not hold a government entity accountable?
Yeah.
Goes back to what we've been talking about with schools. You know, like accountability is a good thing.
It's almost like that should be an elected position. Because in government, the only way to have accountability is to get thrown out of office.
Yeah.
But I would argue that your president appoints those people. I mean, every 4 years we have the ability to elect people who we want to appoint people into those
I
positions.
think we've found that the bureaucracy is a little harder to change than just the president appoints a new person to head it up. I don't know that I don't know if it's quite that simple.
I'm not going to disagree with that, but
I think they're a little more entrenched in all aspects of life than
it
than
goes.
what one person can come in and change.
Yeah, it goes back to what we talked about earlier with something being approved this year and it's 6 years away from happening. The government wheels turn slow. you know, like, you may see a massive problem, but you can't fix it tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely can't fix it today or next week. You know, it takes time.
Especially like the roots run deep there. If every employee, they don't change. Every administration, and then employees, they may have been there 20
when you've
years.
got tens of thousands of government employees and you're changing one person, what do you really?
Yeah.
What change can you really affect in
A for
4
effort.
years or whatever with that one person?
And I think that's totally my opinion here. I think that's some of what we're seeing in Trump's second run here at presidency is he's incredibly aggressive. Probably doing a lot in the gray because he realized in his first term, I couldn't do what I thought I could do. You know, normal business practices do not work in the government. And he's come back a second term with intent to maybe accomplish his goals. And we're seeing a lot of
It'll take them
We
6
could-
months.
a lot of crazy practices.
We could have several podcasts if we start getting into our beliefs on federal government and presidencies and things, but we're at the 2 hour mark right now. We should probably start winding this one down and not get into that.
Well, I'll kind of talk about the regulatory. Like, what can one person do, though? Like, your secretary of whatever, they get to determine the regulations. So, like, one person could come in, and if the statute, and I was kind of getting into this and got away from it earlier, but, like, your statutes are vague. And that's what I was getting into with the SAF stuff, was to say, we basically just say there's a $2.50 credit, but Department of Ag and Energy and other, I would call bureaucrats, whatever, agencies will write the exact rules of who qualifies. So like in that sense, like the EPA, if the EPA just says under FIFRA, the product has to be reviewed regularly and doesn't put a time limit, doesn't say 1 year, doesn't say 10 years, doesn't say 20, the reg could say regularly means every single year. And your secretary can do that. But now here's the thing about a regulation, and we all want this as citizens. Citizens have the ability to participate in that process, every single citizen. So every regulation has to have so many days. It's got to be filed, and then it has so many days for public comment. And every single person in the public can file a comment on that. And then they have to review that, and then there's oversight of those regulations. So regulations take a long time to go into effect because they do have to have mandates of the public being able to comment on.
I would say part of that is the majority of the public don't even realize that that's going on, that they have that rider ability.
And that's where I come in. So like when we have a rule that we don't like that's about to go into effect, like we will write comments on behalf of Kentucky Farm Bureau and say, we believe this is government overreach on our farmers. And then I will draft up a little memo that says, I state your name, farm and state your county, put what you farm, and then write that you oppose that regulation. Then I send it to our 460,000 members to say, click here and put your thoughts in on why you oppose this rule.
When I think of regulatory agencies, I think of a lot of them that concern the right to bear arms, and there's always constantly stuff changing with the ATF or whoever it is, that's regulating different types of rifles, and it seems like it's a constant back and forth on what's legal and what's not, or what's believed to be, and there's constant court battles. And
that's the problem with regulation compared to law, is that a reg changes with the stroke of the pen, is what President Obama said. So if the law doesn't speak specifically to it, a regulatory agency can change it. But we just had, we're not going to get into it, but I encourage people to look up the Chevron doctrine. The Supreme Court just made a huge ruling a couple of years ago, which essentially said that regulations aren't left up to the interpretation of the agencies. It really was a huge hit to agencies in how much flexibility they had in writing the rules. So they have to have congressional intent. And just,
which I think is how it should be.
Look up the Chevron doctrine. Yeah, the Supreme Court just wrote on that a couple of years ago.
Make a note of that, actually.
We'll see what happened. I've not had a bunch of calls of people bragging about how much better the regulatory environment's gotten since then. But in theory, it should be good for business if they believe the government's overreaching.
Well, anything else?
Well, yeah, Kyle, I got one last question for you that I think we should start ending every show like this. Who are 3 people that you think we should try to get on the show? And
well, I've already mentioned one. You gotta get Gracie on. You know?
Gracie, okay.
So my wife, she lobbies for, like I say, lobbied for the counties, now the cities. So she has done a lot of work on policies. Sometimes we don't agree on, but she could bring an interesting perspective to what she knows and what she works on in Frankfort around county and city governments. I think it'd be awesome if y'all got Jonathan Shell on. I mean, I kind of mentioned at the beginning, I love Jonathan. He's one of my closest friends, other than you guys, of course, that I get to spend like every week with. But Jonathan's not just a statewide elected official, being the commissioner of agriculture. He's also full-time farmer. Lost his
Think he would have the time to come on here and talk to us?
Yeah, I do, because it's tough right now because I was just about to mention he lost his father unexpectedly in early January, and he's had to take over the family farm, and they're just coming out of the heart of what they do in the greenhouse. But he's also got a couple hundred head of mama cows and bred heifers and pumpkins and all this other stuff. But he loves talking to rural communities and sharing what he's doing. He's very passionate about it. So I would definitely think trying to get Jonathan Shell on. And then, I'd try to get your state rep, Savannah Maddox, state senator Jay Williams, try to get them on. And they're both very active in what they believe in and file bills. And, they could share their perspective on Frankfort, and maybe they're privy to what's called caucus meetings, which they can't really talk about. And I don't know about because it's just kind of internal, but they can probably talk a little bit about what happens behind the scenes of Frankfort that even lobbyists that are up there every single day don't get to see or hear. And like I say, they can't. Some of that stuff you hear closed door meetings. I mean, it needs to stay private, but they can probably talk a little more about the process.
Alrighty.
Yeah, I think that's one of the number one things I've taken from this show here today that I think our viewers should definitely hear is the importance and the value of that relationship with your state representation.
Yeah. It'd be great if we could get some of those people on.
Whether we're having personal relationships with them or we're electing people who do, I think that's a big deal. So,
yeah. Absolutely.
Well, Kyle, thanks a lot, man. Appreciate having me.
We sure appreciate you coming on, brother.
Yeah, happy to be on. Thank you all for having me.